having to go to people and ask to borrow money again to my mum, going to other people, asking them to borrow money, um, having to put my hands in the air and say, look, I ain't the big shot I look like I am, having to sort of hide that suffering, as it were, from the other wealth managers in the office because I was in a senior position. If they're watching this now, they will have had no idea. So there was the sort of the hiding of it from people on one side, and then, the embarrassment of shame, humiliation, all those feelings. And then, feeling like, as you said, this was your last shot across the bows. What now? Are you gonna tumble into some homeless situation?
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it.
Howard, thanks so much for being here today. So where did it start in business for you, Howard?
I probably, when I was about 9 years old, my mother was what was called an antiquarian book dealer. She used to sell very old, rare books. One year she bought me a book on magic and conjuring, and I absolutely loved it. I put on a show for my family and friends, and they were all very polite. And within really a couple of years, I was a semi-professional child magician. So that's really where my entrepreneurial life began as a kid. And it's just in the blood. My father and mother, both entrepreneurs. So I've just kind of grown up with that ethos.
What did they do?
So my father was originally an economist in a big corporation, but he suffered from kidney failure and he was on kidney dialysis. And in those days, it was a very hit and miss affair. So the corporation he was working with only promoted him so far. So he gave it all up and he became an antiquarian map dealer. My mother became a book dealer and they worked in business together. Despite his disability, he traveled the world. And so I had a very early model of real courage because, he had 2 kids, me and my sister. And he really took a big risk to do that. But he felt that if you can only go so far and no further, what's the point of doing that? Where's the joy in that? And I also think he felt he was being discriminated against because of his disability. And he absolutely loved old maps and prints and became a real expert. And so I used to go with him at a young age to Portobello Road Market, which you probably know well. And at lunchtime, he'd leave me alone to man the stand. And so I learned about sales very early, and believing me, ruthless dealers from around the world took no pity on the fact I was a young kid. So I grew up in that realm. My mother sold books, so she used to have book catalogs in those days, paper versions that me and my sister would put together by hand. We sort of always laughingly referred to that as slave labor. But, we were learning the businesses really, and learning what it took to make a success. So she would travel as well widely, both in search of books and in order to sell them. She attended book fairs around the world, and then my father kind of joined her. So yeah, it was just a part of growing up. I never really wanted for anything. We came from a pretty solid middle class London background. And so I never felt the shock. I only realize in retrospect, really, what a risk my dad took with that with that move.
Mm. It sounds like you could write a book about that kind of setup, couldn't you?
Yeah, yeah,
Fascinating story, and as you
mm,
say, very bold and brave of both your parents. I am intrigued though by a map dealer and a book dealer. They've picked very particular niches.
yes. And so my mother worked originally in a new book publisher, and when a new book was published, she was tasked with taking copies of those books to bookshops. And while she was in the bookshop, she'd have a look around at the second-hand section,
Mm.
which was usually somewhere in the back in a dusty old corner. And she just fell in love with old books. And I think because of that, some of those old books were atlases full of maps. And so my father saw these maps and he realized, by taking out the maps and getting them colored and framed and mounted, he had a little side hustle, effectively,
Mm.
is what it would be known as now
Yeah.
in Portobello Row, but he cut his teeth. So they both sort of cut their teeth with a day job while they were learning about something they really loved. So it wasn't this deliberate choice of a niche or niche, as they say in the
Mm.
States. It was really based on love and passion for their subject that took them to expert status.
Mm.
Both of them were well known in the industry, both for their expertise and also in an industry that can be full of crooks.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
They were known for their absolute honesty. My mother was known for that because she would, for example, go and visit somebody, find some books they had, offer them what was then £5, about £8, go home, do some research, find out that they were worth 500, and she would go back and give that person more money. So she was very unusual. And so I inherited both their idea of basing a business on love and passion. I'm still a massive believer in that. And cutting your teeth on another more reliable business while you build that expertise. And then just exercising a kind of ruthless honesty
Mm.
that I think people really appreciate.
Mm.
And, as you know, we're all too aware of the hyperbole that is so often surrounding businesses, particularly in the internet age, where it's so difficult to separate sometimes the fake from the real.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, their values I inherited early, I think, and subconsciously, I was.
No, of course, you're just absorbing those, aren't you? And,
Hmm.
we all know the Jim Rohn quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And obviously, if 2 of those are your parents who are both entrepreneurs, of course, it's going to be osmosis. And I think the word that struck me as well when you were talking is integrity, right? It sounds like they had, huge kind of integrity.
Yeah.
So how did that lead on to you starting your first business?
Well, I guess sales just were part of being in my blood.
Mm.
So, with my cousin, I made candles and we sold them. That was my very first entrepreneurial venture aside from the magic.
How old?
The magic went right through into my 20s
Mm.
and 30s. I ended up doing a magic trick for Michael Jackson. That's a whole other story.
Oh, wow.
But it was never a full-on business. I considered it. But yeah, really making and selling candles was my very, very first business venture. And I believe we would have built a candle empire had it not been for the fact that my cousin set fire to his mother's kitchen, and that our business ended with a sudden shock, a bit like Google pulling out the algorithm. My cousin's mother pulled out the wax making abilities, and that was the end of our empire. But I remember selling out of those candles. And again, another lesson is that we didn't just do bog standard candles. We went to a candle making supply shop in London that specialized in a kind of rubber paint you could paint onto any object pretty much
Mm.
and make a candle a mold from it, and then we would pour in the wax and paint them with gold and do all kinds of cool stuff to make these like super cool candles. And the kids at school really loved them, and I enjoyed making them. But that was, yeah, that was my very first entrepreneurial venture.
Why? How old were you then?
I think I was about 11, I think, something like that. Yeah.
So you had two. Yeah, you had the magic and the candles.
Yeah.
So then, how did your kind of entrepreneurial, I suppose, desires and drive lead on from that and develop?
Yeah. So my parents are kind of traditional middle class. Howard, it's fine to be an entrepreneur and all of that, but you should get a degree. I didn't really want to do a degree, but so I thought I'll do a degree in magic. And
Is that possible?
well, it is. The only place that was possible to do it was America, and I just didn't have the means to do that. So I took a year out and I thought about it, and I thought, in my naivety, I thought I'll do the next best thing to magic, which is drama and acting, because magic and acting are kind of aligned. So I went along to a magical place called Bretton Hall College in Yorkshire, and I studied drama there. And I worked with one of the founders of improvisation in the UK, a wonderful professor by the name of John Hodgson. And drama just took over from magic. I realized that drama was a superior form of magic. And so, I became a writer and an actor, and just fell in love with the whole creative process. So just to trace that back, when I was about 8 or 9, I had the idea of being a novelist, because I suddenly realized that, oh, someone has written this book that I'm reading. And you can imagine our home was full of books.
Of course, yeah.
My mother's work. So I attempted to write, and I went down into the living room, and I had a blank piece of paper in front of me. And in my memory, I don't know whether it's true or a fake memory, but I think it's true. The sunlight was kind of shining onto this blank page. And I suddenly realized, what the hell am I going to write a novel about? And so essentially I had a kind of 10 years writer's block that going to Bretton Hall College opened up. And so I suddenly started writing, acting. It was like just a real flowering. And that has been with me ever since. So for me, the sign of a great education there is that I was given keys that I still use today in the coaching that I do now. And so it was just really a wonderful, wonderful education. And as an actor, you probably know most of your time is spent what's called resting, which is basically means being out of work.
Yeah, it's a nice euphemism for that.
Yeah, and I had a very foolish notion based on my limited understanding of creativity that I should always do mindless day jobs because I didn't want to draw on that creative energy. Well, that was a big mistake, because those mindless day jobs just got me so frustrated. But one of the most mindless jobs I did was at a place called the Ideal Home Show in London, which at that time was 28 days, not including the press days. And I was required to attend every day of the week.
No.
And it was like 8 till 8, Monday to Sunday, and then 8 till 10 on Thursday. So it was a killer. But what made it even more of a killer was that I was on a hot tub stand, so selling jacuzzis, but I wasn't selling those. I was at the back of the stand selling accessories, filters and chlorine.
The non-sexy stuff.
Yeah. In order to stop myself going mad, they had rubber ducks, and I didn't know this, people collect rubber ducks. Did you know that?
Didn't know.
Yes,
I learned something today.
People do, and they had about 30 of these ducks. And so over the period of 28 days, I developed a one-man stand-up comedy rubber duck routine. Hello, sir, you look like you could do with a quick duck. Hello, madam, are you interested in a ducking? It was cheap, but it got me through it. Anyway, I started selling out of these ducks. The managing director of the hot tub company saw me in action and he said, "You're doing that quite well. Would you like to sell hot tubs next year?"
Of course.
So I ended up, yeah, selling those. And then I went to my very first ever sales training. So I natural born salesperson, never done any training. The training was in Portugal, funnily enough, where I am now. And I absolutely loved it. And at that point, a light kind of lit up, and I realized I could use my writing, my acting skills, my sales skills. And so I went up to the trainer on day one, a lovely American guy, and Greg Welsh, his name is. And I said, "Greg, I want to do your job." And I was expecting him to laugh and say, "Yes, off you go, son." And he said, "Let me help you." And the next year I was doing his job and he helped me to effectively do his job in Europe. I became a sales trainer and I then delivered that sales training globally to thousands of sales professionals. I brought in my own particular take on acting and I still do that today. So that's been an ongoing journey.
Mm.
But there was a period where I got carried away with myself in England. I had basically two retainers to do the sales training, both of which were handsomely paid. And I bought a hybrid sports car in my confidence. And pretty much the day after I bought it, I lost both retainers almost overnight. And that was my first real financial disaster. I was about, I think, 26,000 quid in debt, no job, nothing. So a very good friend who's a millionaire said, "Howard, I know this guy. He runs a charity in London. Go work with him." So I did that for a year, selling. But I felt like such a shabby old failure. I was in a little flat on my own, wandering around in my dressing gown, thinking, I've blown it. Had all this amazing career and it's all collapsed. And that was really, I think, a low point for me where I couldn't really see a way out of that. And I was doing well selling in the charity. And so I asked the charity owner for a raise in salary. And he said no. And I hate hearing the word no when it's not deserved. I don't mind it when you've earned a no. That's fine. So I put my CV onto one of the websites, I don't know which one. And a few days later, I got a call from a Scottish chap who said, "I'm with a wealth management company and we'd like you to, perhaps do some training with us as a wealth manager." And I said, "I'm not so interested in the sales." It was more bravado, this question, than reality, really. "I'm not so interested in the sales, but what's the career path?" I said it because I thought it would be a clever question to ask. And he said, "Well, when you've hit 150 and you've trained up one other person, we'll consider you for management." And I was like, 150? Does he mean 150,000? And so I'd been someone who'd been going along on 30, 40,000 pounds, jogging along thinking that was a good year as an actor and salesperson and trainer. And suddenly there's some dude, and I quite frankly didn't believe it. I thought it was all a con. I checked into it. Now, my father was an economist before he became an entrepreneur. So I've got a background in finance. And I decided to go and do the training, which was in Malta. And it was 4 days of very intense training. And then nearly everyone afterwards was off to Dubai because that was where the money was. I don't really love the Middle East to live. And they said, "Well, you're an arty kind of softy bloke. Why don't you go to Shanghai? Because there's lots of cafes there and you'll get on well." And so kind of randomly, because I'd never lived in Asia, I decided to take a big risk, just like my dad. I sold everything, including my hybrid sports car that I paid 26,000 for. I sold it for about 5,000, something like that.
Wow.
Packed 2 suitcases and with about 6,000 quid, went to China and as a wealth manager with 4 days training, with no friends, no word of Mandarin, no idea really what I was going into. And many of my friends said, don't be crazy. You've got a steady job. I know it's not the best job in the world, but at least you are earning a steady, you'll go to China, you'll be a horrible failure and just don't do it. We love you, please. But something in me, it was partly the money, but it was also this idea. I was 53 at that point. It was this idea of I could kind of cheat the system. So, I've spent my life being a maverick artist and writer and magician and salesperson doing all this without ever really having what you might consider a proper job. I could go to China, I could make loads of money and then retire and I'll have kind of bucked the entire system. So there was partly that thinking. And then going to China was very, very tough indeed, as you can probably imagine. Just to give you one image, the company I was with was very traditional and they required us to wear a suit and tie. So it was the middle of August when I arrived, and the only place I could afford to live was about an hour away from the office. And I put on my suit and tie. By the time I got to the subway station, my suit was just soaked with sweat. It was, some horrendous temperature and very high humidity. And that defined my first several months in China. It was a battle against the elements, a battle against just building a business from nothing with 6,000 quid in another continent where I knew nobody. The office I went to at that point was a bit of a shambles. No one even knew I was arriving. There was little to nothing by way of support. God bless them. And so I was very much thrown on my own resources. And I think that was probably tough. However, it wasn't as tough as the losing my retainer because I had this wonderful hope of, I can make 6 figures plus here. There's no upper limit. So I had that as a kind of beacon of hope. Whereas before, what had made it tough was it felt hopeless.
I suppose 2 questions come to mind about this big step that you've taken to move to China, selling all of your worldly possessions and everything, not, after 4 days training. How much of that is down to the influence of your dad and like the risks that he took? And, is that one of the things that he kind of gave you in terms of like essentially just taking those big leaps of faith?
Yes, and he was also very courageous as a person. So, he suffered from kidney failure. He was on dialysis, which in those days, we're talking back in the 1970s, kidney dialysis machine was not the little thing people now wear on their waist. It was a huge F-off machine. And, he used to have to go into a specially built room 3 nights a week for 8 hours a night.
Gosh.
And he never, ever complained about his disability. He was a sort of saint-like man in that respect. So I think it was not just the influence of the risk-taking, but the courageous and positive mindset that no matter what the obstacle, there are always benefits. I mean, he was a very philosophical man, a spiritually focused man in many ways. And he always said it was the ruination of his body, as it were, that made him turn to his development of his mind. So he was a philosophical man. And I think it was a combination because ultimately, because I knew deep in my bones that I've got bulletproof sales skills, my thinking was, well, if I go to China and it all goes horribly pear-shaped, I can always come back to London and get another job in sales. Yes, I'll have to deal with the chagrin of facing all my friends saying, yep, you were right. But I had a backup plan, as it were, sketchy though it was, and it was my father's influence, and also I think my mother's, because my mother, and this leads into the kind of the financial failure. My mother was very expert, but also a spendthrift. So my father was a really cost conscious bookkeeping economist who was very aware of balancing the books. My mother was like, see a book, buy it. And she would often have to go up the road to the bank manager and have a conversation about her overdraft. So I had these two kind of contrasting models and somewhat confusing, but what my mother did was she made me unafraid, foolishly unafraid in some ways and not in others, of throwing money at the wall. And I've always been like that. I'm still to some degree like that. So I would say that is what got me into trouble in China, was that I threw that 6,000 at my business. So just to explain what happened, unless you want to ask.
Yeah, I do want to just ask something as well, because given where you were in your trajectory of your kind of life and career at that point, you obviously, as you said, you were, you'd had sort of gone on a sort of winding career path, if you want to put it like that, and obviously you had that kind of big blow at 26, losing those retainers. And given you were kind of 53, and obviously, you'd had this, I would say, big carrot dangled in front of your face. Did it kind of feel like a last throw of the dice for your career, that the last opportunity to kind of make the big bucks kind of thing?
Yes, or really the only opportunity. Nobody had ever dangled a carrot of that magnitude
Mm,
before me.
mm,
So yes, it was really another reason to go, was just the opportunity aspect of it, compared with the risk. The worst would happen, run out of money and have to come back and start again. But to me, wandering around shabbily in my dressing gown, wasn't much of an alternative. I did interview for other jobs in London before I went, and some of them were offering six figures, but they were fixed salary and they were long hours, and they were in what I would consider a bit of a soul crushing job. So the nice thing about this carrot, apart from its juiciness, was the fact that I could create that career in my own image.
mm.
I wasn't restricted by employment. I was contracted effectively. I was self-employed. So I could create that wealth management business in the way that I felt would be suitable for me and my personality. So I also think, aside from it being a kind of last throw of the dice,
Yeah.
it also felt something that was doable to me. Even just with those 4 days training, I saw enough in that to know that there were people who needed help, who had serious amounts of wealth
Mm.
and who needed help. Even though I was only 4 days into that experience, I could already see the demand and the need for it. So those all played into the decision as well.
And had you finished acting by now, or are you still acting on the side?
I've never finished acting.
Right.
No, I mean, I'm still acting. I just made an advert. So I've never finished with acting. I've never finished with writing,
Mm,
and I never finished with training. All of those continued
mm.
and continue to this day. So in a way, those are the common threads through all of this
Got it.
kind of weaving, as you nicely put it. There's the common threads, I think, are the communication side of things. Effective and good communication.
So the structure, there was is it like a franchise setup? Explain the structure of this wealth management sort of business a little bit more.
It's not a franchise, but it's basically like a contracted role. So I was self-employed in effect, with commission only in effect.
Right.
So if I didn't sell, I didn't eat.
Mm.
And That's often the model in financial services. Um, and so I I had an administrative team to support me, but it was essentially up to me to bring in clients,
Right.
and how I did that was up to me as well. And so that was another big learning curve for me. Was when I arrived, most of the people in the office were sat on the phone annoying people with cold calling,
Mm.
and the only other alternative was networking. And so I threw myself into networking. I'd never really done it before. I'd always resisted it naively. I'd considered it a loser's game where only desperate people networked with each other. And I went from network naive to network ninja very, very quickly. I did it 6 days a week. I just went all in on that. I mean, actually, to a detrimental extent. I was staggering down the road at the end of the day. I was close to burnout,
Mm.
but I absolutely threw myself into that, even though it was expensive, even though I couldn't see an immediate return. And so that's what got me into financial difficulty. I could see the opportunity because the very first event I went to was a British Chamber of Commerce event. There was a very nice British chap there. We got on very well. And I said to him, I'd love to come and have a chat with you about your financial situation. And he said, yeah, no problem. I live in Nanjing. I said, fine. I had no idea where Nanjing was. It turned out to be thousands of miles away. Luckily, China has incredible high-speed trains, and I went to see him. It took 2 hours by train, and he never became a client, actually, but he led to my very first client. He worked in Nottingham University in Nanjing. Or was it Ningbo? Anyway, I think it was Ningbo. Beg your pardon. And so I saw immediately that there was this really, really great opportunity. And I think that's what led me to kind of be more like my mother with throwing around my money, and to the point where after a few months I'd run out. I'd used my 6,000 and I hadn't made a sale.
Wow.
So that was very tough.
And you didn't get any sort of support from them in terms of like travel expenses to go and visit clients. It was all on you.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah. Basically the administrative support was there. All the ability to take that sale and process it. All of that was supplied. But no, everything was at my expense. There was at that point no salary or income, nothing coming in. It was just all going out. And even though I was living on bowls of rice and chicken and living in a cheap old cockroach infested apartment, hours away, I was throwing a lot of money at the networking.
Before we get into like, how did that play out? One thing also intrigued me was what did you do about language? Because if you're doing so much networking, what did you do?
Yeah. So luckily, the Chinese are amongst the warmest, most honest, generous, supportive people I've ever met. And I was totally lost, didn't speak a word of Mandarin. So using a series of hand signals, gestures, mime, and whatever else, I got help when I could. And I got on a bus once and it turned out to be going totally the wrong way. And I had a little old gentleman leave his wife on the bus, get off the bus and walk me, several minutes or half an hour's worth to where I needed to get to. So I really had a tremendous amount of help. And then the other thing that landed me on my feet was that because China is an adverse environment in many respects for us poor old Western folk, the expats who were there, who were my clients, all were also extremely supportive, welcoming, people I would otherwise not have had the time of day from in London, it leveled us out in terms of status. So those two things really saved me in terms of my ability to connect.
So that's who you were targeting, right? The expat community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So the wealth management company was only based on expats
Right.
because we couldn't legally help the local Chinese for a start. And also, as an expat, there were tax advantages to the way they structured their wealth that only expats have. So
Right.
I was in a niche.
No, got it.
Yeah.
So you're there and you've got no money, and yeah.
Yeah.
So what how did you tackle that?
Well, I somewhat shamefacedly, I asked my mother at the age of 53, I said, Mum, I've run out of money. I know for a fact there's a massive opportunity here. Can you please lend me? I think it was £2,000 I asked her for. Now, my mum's a comfortable middle class woman, but, 2,000 quid to her was still quite a lot. She sent it without question that day. It was like, there it is.
Mm.
And it was touch and go, but the very first sale I made was for a commission of £10,000.
Right.
So having bitten the bullet and said to my mum, I need your help. Can you please lend me some money? I was very quickly able to pay her back. And from that one sale, I then got more, and within a year, I was the top guy in the office. Within a couple of years, I was in the top 20 in the world. And so it really was that point of real struggle. I think even more than the finance. So, it's one thing to run out of money, but the sheer effort involved in building that business from scratch. It was, I know this analogy is used a lot, but it was like trying to power up an airplane on a runway. And I had to give it so much in terms of my own learning about the industry, meeting people, getting to know Shanghai, China, traveling everywhere, going to endless networking events. It was very draining. So I think this idea we were talking about before the recording started, this idea of, yeah, we're just going to start a business, everything's going to be brilliant. No, it takes real, I think, grit, resilience, positive energy, determination in the face of adversity. So,
Well, you add some complexity to it by going to a different country where the language
yeah,
isn't yours.
yeah.
So yeah, that definitely it is something. Um,
Mm.
and wasn't there another time? So didn't you nearly go bankrupt twice as well?
Yeah, yeah. So then, so what happened? I spent about 8 years networking, and I got very, very good. I made a lot of money. I spent a lot of money, thanks, Mum. And, I take responsibility. I was by then 58. I should know better. But anyway, I was spending a lot, making a lot. Life was good. But I was getting tired of networking. And it was also unscalable in the sense that I was limited. I tried to hire other people to become mini Howards, but to really little to no effect. I just couldn't multiply that business. So I started to think about going online as a wealth manager, and I tried it. I did a podcast for a year. I did all kinds of videos. I got absolutely nowhere in terms of results. And through my networking, I'd joined a group which gave talks every last third Friday of the month, I think. And the only criteria for the talk was it had to be nothing to do with your day job. So I thought I'll give a talk on sales skills for business people.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I gave that
I thought
talk.
you were going to say magic. You're going to do magic performance then, but
Well, it was a kind of magic. So, the usual talk was with a Zoom, with a PowerPoint slide, and everyone politely watched it through lunch. I didn't have any slides, nothing. I just got everyone up, basically doing acting exercises around sales. There was what's called a China old hand there. So a China old hand is an expat who's been around for more than 10 years. He was a lovely American chap. He'd been in China 30 odd years. He was about to retire. And he said to me, Howard, that was the best training I've ever had. You've got to get that out to the world. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I took that as a kind of a sign that there's something here, because I trained people inside the wealth management company as a matter of course. But I thought, actually, maybe I could do this. And so
you've gone full circle, basically going back to sales training.
it was kind of, yeah.
Mm.
So I'm a big believer in actually spirals rather than circles. So, I think we're either spiraling up or we're spiraling down. And I was kind of doing both at the same time in a way, because what I then did was I joined every course and guru and marketing maven online known to mankind, worked like a demon, spent thousands and thousands on it, and basically ran out of money again.
So were you trying to do both businesses at the same time? Or were you still trying to do the wealth management and the sales training at?
Yeah. And so the second mistake I made was that when I started online, it was very tough, but I managed to get a couple of sales. Then I put on a workshop, followed by some training, as it's called, on the back end of that workshop. And I made, I think, about $15,000 in that weekend. And I thought, this is it. I'm launched. Howard is Mr. Internet. Here we go. And so I all but gave up the wealth management. I just went into the office one day a week, cut right down on it, and kind of gave up on it in my heart, really, more than the physical presence. I sort of just gave up on that drive to get more clients. And I could never repeat that success I had with that workshop. Tried all kinds of reiterations of it, different ways of angling it, different price points, different messaging, but I just couldn't get any traction. And because I'd let go of the wealth management, and more than letting go of it, I wasn't really willing to go out and walk the hard yards needed to rebuild it. I ran out of money again.
So what was the fallout of that one? Was that a bit harder?
Yes, it was harder in the sense that the first couple of times, as it were, it was more out of my control in a way, because I didn't have an alternative. It was like, you're all in or you're not. This was my own naivety, at the age of whatever it was, 58, 59. Plus, I think I was arrogant. I think I was too self-confident, that I've cracked this whole internet thing based on basically one good result. And so I had to learn that lesson. And if anyone wants to take a lesson there, it's, don't give up the day job until you've really got a solid model that's repeatable, sustainable, and growing, in a way that's really consistent. I took that one result. That's it. I immediately invested into a $26,000 program based on that one result. And, so then I was bound to that wheel of paying for that whilst I'd run the other business down. And then I think it was arrogance as well, in the sense of not being willing to just go back to the basics and go out and start networking again. I don't blame myself for that, because I'd lost my mojo. So I don't actually think it would have done me much good to do it. But yes, there was some self-blame there and guilt about, oh, Howard, you sort of bringing in 7 figures and you've blown it all. So that was tougher, I think, than the other occasions.
That sounds some particularly difficult self-talk there.
Yeah, I think so. And
It's quite harsh. I mean,
yeah, also, older, Howard, you should be wiser. On some level, I recognize anyone can make a mistake. But for me, it was just dumb in a way. And in another way, now looking back, I don't think there was any other way I could have gone, because I still have clients I deal with as a wealth manager. So I still retain a group of clients today and I enjoy it. But what I had lost all joy of and in was going out networking and looking for new clients. So I basically wanted to become a little farmer and nurture my existing clients and then build this other business. Um, so I had a model in my mind based on what I didn't realize at the time was too limited an amount of data. So I was quite harsh with myself, and in a way, rightly so, because it was foolhardy to do what I did. And then in another way, looking back now, I just think it was very understandable. And, I got very excited. Obviously, the people who were taking my 26K were also very excited, not by the 26K, but, by the result I'd had. And so we all thought, well, this is it. This is you launch now. And you're going to go from here, from strength to strength. So now I'm less harsh in retrospect. And also because I've recovered from that. But it was I think the most difficult time.
And what was the sort of the lowest point of that? Was there a moment that you look back on and there's sort of a dark moment, or when the reality hit of running out of money again?
I think, having to sell stuff, look at selling stuff, having to go to people and ask to borrow money again, to my mum, going to other people, asking them to borrow money, having to put my hands in the air and say, look, I ain't the big shot I look like I am, having to sort of hide that suffering, as it were, from the other wealth managers in the office, because I was in a senior position. If they're watching this now, they will have had no idea. So there was the sort of the hiding of it from people on one side, and then, the embarrassment of shame, humiliation, all those feelings. And then, feeling like, as you said, this was your last shot across the bows. What now? Are you gonna tumble into some homeless situation? I feared that.
Was it that bad? Did it get that close?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, at points I just didn't know where the rent was going to come from. I was paying £2,500 a month just in rent.
Because obviously you'd upgraded from your cockroach place.
Yes, upgraded the cockroach place. So again, looking at my life, my patterns, I think I had the courage and bravery of my dad, but the spending habits of my mum. And those two things together led to financial difficulty.
And what you used some words which were quite striking and similar to, where we were talking about we were talking about self-blame earlier. You used the word shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that? Was that, are those concepts quite big in China? Is it very similar to like Japanese, where it's, the whole saving face thing? Was that influenced a little bit by that as well?
I don't think it was so much about China as my own status as a senior wealth manager, who on the one hand was wearing lovely suits and, going to posh hotels and meeting my clients and discussing wealth with them, while at the same time absolutely struggling myself through what I saw as my own fault. Nobody was to blame for it. I couldn't, as in the first case, say, well, I lost my retainers overnight. It was economics. It was this, it was that. This was really my own doing. So I think it was shame in that sense that, there I was, I thought, with a fake image of somebody, a wealth manager who can't manage his own wealth.
Yes.
So if any of my clients are listening to this, I understand if you send me a letter saying, okay, Howard, that's enough. Well, it's this, it's this dissonance between the brilliant advice I was able to give others and then my inability to follow it myself. So I think that sense, you remember we talked about this integrity. For me, it affected that. It wasn't deliberate lack of integrity, but for me, there was a lack of alignment between the life as it was being lived externally and the truth behind that life financially.
Yeah, it was like you were living a double life.
Yeah, I wasn't really able to share that with anyone except very close friends, family.
And how long did you live like that for? Because that's going to be difficult to keep up, isn't it? That air of pretense.
So that went on, I would say, probably for about a year or so
Oh.
of struggle and uncertainty and trying to fight my way through. And yes, I think the strain and the stress of that, took its toll. Luckily, I have very loving, supportive people around me who I could share with. And one thing I have learned is when I'm under stress, I don't keep it bottled up, which I used to do when I was younger. And that then sent me spiraling off into all kinds of crazy behavior. So by sharing it and saying I'm stressed, I'm worried, that was tremendously helpful. So I felt I wasn't living a double life in terms of pretending so much as professionally protecting myself in a sense. And, I didn't see the point of telling my clients, look, I've blown it because my side hustle I thought was going to be a main hustle. And now, I don't know that it would have done them or me any good, but I felt a dissonance and an irony to it, right? Of on the one hand, I'm a wealth manager.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, my own wealth has gone, So it was really the sort of the biting irony of that situation. It is kind of comical in a way now, but at the time it was painful and very scary as well because there's just no backup in China. It's not like I was ever really part of any kind of social security system or anything like that. So had I literally not been able to pay, we would have been out, So that was very tough, I think.
No, it sounds it. But I think it's a fascinating story, and I think there's lots of parallels that because you mentioned about that's not the way to transition from a stable job into like an entrepreneurial venture. But I also saw it as a lesson, as a sort of general business lesson of don't be distracted by like shiny pennies and the kind of thinking of, well, you've got this really strong revenue stream if we think about it in business terms, but you've kind of in some ways maybe lost interest in that and then thought, oh, there's this other revenue stream, I'll go all in on that, whilst sort of forgetting or dumping the other one. So I think there's also a business lesson of it's kind of like you needed to work out in some ways how to keep the other one running while you set up this new one.
Yes, I just ransacked and gave up on the whole thing. So I kept existing clients. And so, yes, I lacked strategy there. I allowed my heart to rule my head and just went with what I wanted rather than what would have been strategically much more sensible. So, if you look at, so that's where I followed my mum's model. My mum fell in love with books, became a book dealer, but for years and years and years, she never made money. My father supported her while she learned the trade. My father was much more strategic in that he built up his business in Portobello Road, and then he tried different avenues. So he felt his way into that business. And really, if I was to relive that, I would have been much more strategic and, just done the side hustle at the weekend or in the evenings, kept everything intact, kept my financial position strong, and built up the expertise that I then had to kind of go through with very little resources behind me.
And I think the other sort of lesson for me, or thinking about it, is that essentially both those businesses were reliant solely on you.
Yes.
And you mentioned about trying to hire people to, you said, become mini yous. What stopped you doing that? Or you said it got blocked. Why didn't that work?
I just couldn't ever train someone to do what I did.
Was it a caliber of people?
It's extremely tough to do what I did. I think you need to be a certain type, and probably I just never trained a type that was like me in this sense of kind of a dog with a bone. By the time I got to train people, the structure of the wealth management company had changed because under Chinese law, the company was required to pay what seemed to be a salary. And I say seemed to be a salary in the sense that people got a regular amount of money each month, but in effect, it was deducted from any future commission.
Right.
However, younger folk basically just saw it as a salary, and they didn't care that they were building up a debt with the company. So I think the whole drive was different. I had to make it work, or I was running out of money. That was it. So for the people coming in later who I tried to train, in a sense, I think they were less hungry than me, less urgent need. And I also think, I generally trained people who were younger, and I benefited, I think, from being older because I've got more experience. I could build trust more easily. So I think they struggled in different ways from me. So there are a number of reasons. But I just feel that the training came back in. It was like this spiraling around, and it came back so strongly, and it ended up really that is what got me out of the trouble. And so in a way I was right. It's just my timing was wrong. So I don't think I would have been happy even if I'd been able to scale 5 Howard mini-me's, because I'd essentially rediscovered that joy of training. And, I'd help people with charisma and with coming alive on camera, and they're just things I love so deeply. Whereas the wealth management, it was more of, as we said, a big juicy carrot. It did turn out to be much more meaningful than purely financial, because I helped people structure their entire financial lives, which obviously has a great deal of meaning and still has meaning to me today. But I wouldn't say it was extremely joyful. Meaningful, yes. But my real passion and joy is in helping people to communicate, to come alive in their business, to bring their passion in, and all those things that I just light up with. And so for me, there was a quantitative and qualitative difference in the two businesses. So that also needs to be taken into account. And it somewhat explains my lack of calm rational behavior.
You'd lost the passion for it by the sounds of things, right? You'd lost or you'd seen the passion that you had in the training, and you did say that you were kind of tired of networking by that point as well. So what do you think the one thing would be that you could pinpoint for why your training business didn't work?
Well, it did work. And it is working now.
Right.
But I think the reason it failed then was that I naively got stuck on just one idea because it had worked, and tried in all different ways to try to repeat it. Whereas what I should have done, and what I did do after about a year of struggle, was effectively in times where we're lacking resources, we are the resource. And I had failed to realize that I was the resource. I just needed to structure and position it in a different way rather than hammering. With that company I paid $26,000 to, we basically spent a year hammering the same old idea, but with different labels, different position. But the idea itself wasn't ever replicable. So that was the failure. It was the failure to adapt, diversify in simple terms, to reposition, not necessarily to pivot, actually.
So it was the actual
funnily
product
enough,
that was wrong. The offer and the product to the client was wrong.
and the people and the way I was doing it. It was everything about it. It had hit once with a certain group of people. But yes, it was a one-hit wonder.
And that's also fascinating because why do you think that was? Like, why do you think you couldn't replicate it? What was it about that first workshop that you then couldn't replicate? Because I think, myself and everyone else listening to this would think, well, you've got a kind of proof of concept. Yeah, like once you're right isn't good enough data, but it did show that there was something there, and obviously it wasn't free. You did charge for it. So why do you think you couldn't repeat it?
So I would love to give you some all-wise answer here to help your readers, viewers, listeners, but I'm not 100% sure. There's certain things I can point to. So, I had a list at that point, I think of about 3,500 people.
Right.
And I sent that list numerous emails about the first workshop and managed to get 15, which from a statistical point of view ain't great.
No.
And those 15 people paid, I think, either $47 or $97, something like that. And of those people, 4 or 5 of them went on to do a program that was $1,000 a year, and a couple of them went on to do programs that were 8,000. And so that's how I managed to accumulate that. But essentially what I then did was hammer my poor old list.
Right.
And I'm probably still, if you're out there, I may still be hammering you. If you hadn't unsubscribed, I was hammering that list with very similar repositioned, pivoted type of offers at different price points with different models. And then the other thing that happened was that $1,000 program that I offered on the back end of the workshop, I realized was not really giving people value. So it was very attractive as an offer, and it was low priced for them, and it gave them unlimited access and all this kind of cool stuff. But it was really relying on them driving it. I didn't provide any accountability to them. And if they didn't drive it, they'd just thrown their money away. And I felt that was not a great thing. So in some cases, I refunded people. In other cases, we arranged something different and I gave them a reduction. But that model itself, I didn't think was serving people. But what I couldn't find was another model to replace it. And so it was a number of factors. I think, I'd gathered that list in a ragtag, random way over the period of maybe 2 years.
Was that from your wealth management contacts?
Yeah, wealth management from my sales training days. I ended up sales training for pool owners and jacuzzi owners who were on the list. It was, and then there were entrepreneurs. So I did joint ventures with other entrepreneurs and brought in people. So but I haven't segmented that list. I didn't really know what segmentation was. And so I was hitting random people with a message that was not necessarily relevant. So there are a number of things now that I realize were flawed in the model. I didn't realize that 15 people was such a bad statistic until I spoke to somebody a bit smarter. For me, 15 was great because prior to that, I was getting nobody coming forward, right? So 15 was like a leap, but in actual fact, statistically, it was not a good result.
Yeah, I think there's some super interesting lessons specifically about kind of marketing there as well, isn't there? Because you mentioned about like segmentation, and you said that, and by the sounds of things, that list, it wasn't people signing up to hear about sales training. That's why they didn't sign up. They just had their kind of contact details. So, as you said, you were probably sending them messages, even though they weren't necessarily the right target audience.
Correct.
And I think the other interesting thing is, and I suppose the question here is, because you said that you were essentially just reliant on that list. Did you ever try and build the list? Because there's a certain assumption that, well, I've got these 3,000 people. I'm just going to continue they must want it if I say it enough.
Yes, there was that. And I built the list up to about 8,000 people. But I still couldn't really get much by way of sales for probably a couple of years. And then people started to come through. But yeah, what I did was so I made 2 smart moves. One was to go into these joint ventures, relationships with people. So I realized that who can I joint venture with? Well, hang on a minute. There's all these marketing experts I've paid thousands of dollars to over the last few years. I'm going to get in contact with them and say, look, here's where I am now. Let's have a chat and see if we can help each other build our businesses. I had a list, I think, of about 8,000, and many of them were very wonderful, very supportive. They sent me people from their list. We did list swapping, not the data, but, we swapped lead magnets. So that helped a lot. And then the second thing, ironically and funnily, that I did without meaning to, was I used my networking skills. And when I say without meaning to, so I built up a wonderful group of people through my networking in Shanghai, really, really good people, many of whom became friends, many of whom are still friends. One of whom was the vice president of Apple in China. And I'd always tried to win him over gently, although he was a friend in the finance world, and never succeeded. But we met for a drink one day and he was like, what's up, Howard? And I said, I've done this thing. I'm doing this stuff with this sales training and I love it. And, because I wanted to just share the news. And he said, I'm going to put you in touch with HR because I think we really need this. And so I went from nothing to training the senior managers at Apple.
Oh my God. Wow.
And that was really, I'd love to say it was because of my unrivaled skill and expertise, but it was basically a case of who you know, because I never would have got in the door. And because he was the VP, when he said to the HR team, I really think you should speak to Howard, obviously they are encouraged to do that by the fact he's the VP. And so ironically, I think, by using the network, as it were, without really meaning to, I was just having a chat. That ended up saving my bacon because I'm still working with Apple now. And to me, again, a wonderful lesson in when you're hammering your head against a wall and it ain't working, just take a moment to look around, and maybe there's a field on the other side, you know, and B, the things that we've done that were successful, we can do again, but in another context.
Mm.
And so, I wasn't really networking at
Yeah.
that point. I was just simply chatting with a friend
Yeah.
and expressing my passion for that side of the business. And so I think we make our own luck. I do really, really believe that. And so the thing I would stress is, apart from all of this stress and angst and am I going to be bloody homeless here, I never stopped acting. I never stopped moving. I didn't ever go into a state, and I know this can happen, of like paralysis where I'm curling up under the duvet and, bailiffs come and get me type of thing. I always continued to push out and explore different things and be very positive. So what I've never questioned is the me as a resource, as it were.
Mm.
And so that remains kind of unassailable. It's just it goes back too long for me to question it. Um, that level of skill that I have is very valuable. It's just I wasn't able to connect it
Mm.
in the right way with the right people. And so I think that was a sustaining force. And for me, that's why it's so critical to really have a business that we truly do love and where we feel we're, if not experts, willing to become experts because we love it so much.
Mm.
And to read all the books and to study all the different competitors, not from a sort of strategic point of view, although it makes strategic sense to do that, but from a real love. One of the first things I did when I was building my business online was to go to all my competitors and say to them, I want to write a book. I want to write a book with all of us in it, and I'm going to interview you. And all I ask in exchange, I'll do everything. I'll produce the book, I'll write, I'll edit it with your approval. All I ask is that we have one single landing page and you send everyone to that. And some people said, get lost, you're a competitor. I'm not giving you my list. But 17 people in my own field said, oh, that's great. Let's collaborate. Let's work together. And so I put together a book with other experts. But I was also doing market research
Mm.
because I had 17 different people telling me about their specific, unique way of delivering their message and value and learning into that space. And it all came from love. That wasn't my intention. I was just looking at it as a sort of list building exercise. And so one of the big lessons I'd love to share with you and with your audience is that the reason we go into something is rarely, if ever, the value we really get from it. So I went into the wealth management with this juicy carrot of
Mm.
wealth, but I actually discovered a great deal of meaning in helping people structure their future, their retirement, their kids' education, all of that. I went into the sales training just with this huge amount of love, realizing I could bring all these things together. But, I've had someone at Apple saying to me, I can't say who because of privacy reasons,
Mm.
but they said they were senior leaders. So they were people who were above the senior managers who we did a trial run with. And afterwards I said, how was that? And she said, how this hasn't just changed my communication, it's changed my life.
Mm.
And that has stayed with me. And the impact, this word impact, it's so overused, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what I've realized is the ripple effect of bringing good, genuine skills into the marketplace and really connecting with people. And they then are able to bring those skills of theirs into the market. And for me, that exponential wave of goodness is something that far outweighs any kind of strategy.
And how might people find that? You said you talked about value. You could call it other different words, couldn't you? Passion, maybe. How best do people find it, or is it organic?
Well, can I plug my book shamelessly?
Go for it.
So I've written a book which I think's my life's work, although my life's not over yet, so you never know, called Passion to Profit Online. People can pick up a free copy. Are you okay if I mention a website where they can go and pick it up?
Yeah, we can put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's howardsfreegift.com. And what I talk about there is what I discovered. So that book is a workbook. It's not really a sit down and read it book. It's full of practical stuff, just like that talk I gave. I've tried to make it practical. And what I suggest people do is so just to take a diversion, in the West, we tend to think very much of either or, either I should be a life coach or I should teach people to swim, the kind of thing. 10 years in China has taught me the value of yin and yang, also and. And so for me, what makes my work unique and your work unique and everyone's work unique is a precise combination of the different areas and passions. And so I've looked at my passions. I love playing chess. I just love it. But I'm only ever going to be an average club player. I ain't never going to be a grandmaster. I'm never going to be able to make a living from it. So that I put in the passionate hobby box. I love sales. Could I make a career from that? I love writing. Now, it's very hard. I've tried, but I can't make a living from that, writing novels and screenplays. But I use that in my training. So for me, combining magic, writing, acting training, sales training makes a unique smush that is Howard's, charisma and Howard's way of training. So I would urge people to incorporate areas that they hadn't previously perhaps considered, or at least to consider how could these potentially fit together to really make something powerfully different that is a true expression of the more full range of myself. So in other words, could I teach the kid when he gets out of the pool a bit of life coaching based on the breaststroke? Can I somehow combine those in a way that becomes magical, that then no one else can compete with, because who else has those skill sets combined but me?
Coaching while in the sea, as came to mind there.
Yeah, exactly. Undersea coach.
Yeah. No,
Snorkel while you learn.
some great advice there. So thank you. So you used the word shame and embarrassment earlier when you had that that initial kind of bankrupt, or the one in China. Actually, the second one, wasn't it? And I think there's we talked about it offline. There's a real, particularly in the UK, I think, mentality towards failure, which is people don't want to fail. It's a taboo word. And, you've used the words that people would think about: shame, embarrassment, and that's why people sometimes don't start things, because they don't want those feelings. So what advice would you give to listeners out there who maybe are being held back by that fear of failure?
I would run as hard as possible into failure. So there's a wonderful writer by the name of Samuel Beckett, who I think is one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, who in one of his plays has the phrase, try again, fail better. And for me, we associate the word failure with negative emotions. For me, it's not necessarily a bad thing to feel shame and humiliation. There's a part of me that it's right. I'd blown it. It's not a judgmental feeling. It's more, well, Howard, mate, you're in your late 50s here. You should have known better than You were silly, so, okay, grow up, get over it, Howard. You're all right. You're still alive. You still got the resource. And for me, that is the critical aspect. If you've got something that you really feel is special and has value, I actually believe it's your duty to bring it into the world. It's not just a case of, oh, don't be embarrassed about failure. I think you're letting down the people out there who could benefit from it. I changed that one woman's life at
Mm,
Apple. That for me is more than enough
mm,
justification for going through a bit of discomfort personally. And the other thing is, emotions are like waves on the ocean. Ultimately, they pass and they're good, they're bad, they're indifferent, but we go through them. What is going to be on my gravestone, if there is one, and I don't get cremated or whatever, I don't know, will not be Howard felt shame or, Howard went bankrupt potentially, 17 times, God knows, who knows? It could
hopefully
happen
no more.
again, right?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully. But, it's not going to be that. It's going to be Howard has touched these people, has moved them, has helped them, has given them a gift. And I could never have done that if I was solely bound up with my own fear of failure, shame, humiliation, embarrassment. I also think, although I'm British, I've lived all over the world, in America, in Spain, in China, and in Portugal. And my maverick way has taken me around the world. And if I'd lived in that sort of sad old bloke in his dressing gown space, I would always regret not having given it a go. So the reverse of the safety that one feels by never trying is risky because there's the risk of feeling a tremendous amount of bitterness and resentment. And I've seen this in people who never really gave it a go. Ultimately, I think if we feel we've got some real gift, some real passion, and we want to get it out there and we do it and it fails, do something else.
Mm,
Try again. Try something different.
mm,
It's not the end of the world. But if I never bring it, I'm always going to be wondering, oh, what if only?
yeah.
And I don't want to go to my grave, with what ifs and if onlys and regrets.
Yeah. And that's the worst feeling. Mm. No, there's some great some points there, and I love the Samuel Beckett quote that you mentioned earlier as well. Um, so before we wrap up, I need to go back to something you said earlier because everyone will be thinking about this. Can you briefly tell us a story about Michael Jackson and your magic?
Well, I've been very privileged in my career to have worked with some of the greatest performers on the planet. Anthony Hopkins, Pierce Brosnan, and, through the acting. But through magic, as a bit of a side job, I used to work every Christmas in a big toy shop in London called
Yeah.
Hamleys. And one day, the whole of Regent Street, which is a central street in London's West End, was closed. And I didn't know why. I turned up, like, what's going on? And Michael Jackson was in Hamleys. And so they closed the whole of Hamleys to the public. And I was doing magic tricks and I ended up doing a card trick from Michael Jackson, which was just very, very wonderful. So, leaving aside all the controversy about Michael Jackson, he was such a genius performer. And I thought he was just extremely generous in the way that he received that card trick. And one of the interesting things was that he didn't really want to be touched by anyone. And I was told that. And part of my magic routine was to take a card and wave it on somebody's lapel of their jacket, and it changed. And I couldn't do that. So I had to kind of invent this thing in the moment, or I waved the card and it changed. And, he just had wonderful, wonderful reactions to that. And, he was genuinely entertained and moved, I believe, by that. And so, yes, to me, it was a great memory. And I think working with really stellar, like world-class performers, I've been very privileged to be able to observe them night after night after night and take notes and work out how they manage to produce that magic. And so I think for me, magic and charisma and the ability to bring our magic as you're doing with this show is such a key, even more important now in the age of AI when, it's so easy. All you've got to do is plug in a prompt and, 10,000 LinkedIn posts are done for you whilst you sit pina colada on the beach and watch the money roll in. Well, even if that were doable, I wouldn't want to do it
Mm.
because I can't substitute Michael Jackson and that experience and that the wonder and the magic of that. It might be a bit ironic to say it, but he was like a child. And he had a childlike approach to the world. And in my view, the great artists, the great performers retain their childlike innocence whilst combining it with a really expert adult awareness. And so I'd encourage people to never let go of that. Sometimes we've been very serious today
Yeah, yeah.
about, well, it's a kind of serious subject, potential homelessness. But, what I'd say is, never forget the playfulness, never forget that life is meant to be lived and there's a great deal of joy and play that's naturally around us that sometimes we can forget. And he exuded a playfulness in his spirit, an energy that I feel was, you'd kind of expect me to say that, right?
Yeah.
Because of his magnetism.
Exactly.
But it is the case that many people who are magnetic on stage are the most boring people on the planet off stage.
But not him.
And not him, no. He carried that magic with him, in my view.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's a
Yeah.
fascinating story, and I'm sure a amazing memory for you. So, final question: if you could go back in time and erase, any of those kind of setbacks from happening, so they never happened or never existed in your life, particularly, I would say, the kind of sales training business not working and you having to have that, year or two of struggle, would you take it?
No way. Not in 100 years. No. Because through that suffering, it sounds cliche, but through that suffering and struggle, for me, it's like hammering a sword. A sword does not get to cut its way through the market without being hammered. And it is almost a cliche, that every entrepreneur's book that you read, they'll be down and out, they'll be desperate, they'll be on their last legs when suddenly they get some idea that comes to them and they have a breakthrough. I do not believe breakthroughs are possible without suffering. Maybe it's a sad indictment of our human nature. Maybe there are people out there who say, "No, Howard, you're wrong. I had a breakthrough, mate. I never suffered." But for me, they're inextricably linked. It's the yin and yang of life. And so there's a wonderful movie with Jim Carrey called The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where he has exactly that choice to erase suffering. And when he erases suffering, he erases all the other stuff
Mm.
that went with it. So if you could say to me this, could we erase the suffering but keep the wisdom? Yes, absolutely. I'd I'd take you up on that right now. But I just think because they're inextricably linked, I value that period because it's a time where necessity means we have to evolve
Mm.
or perish. And, in that situation, as long as we retain our wherewithal and retain our ability to continue to act, continue to discover, continue to try to reconfigure, we'll find our way to a kind of wealth. And I'm not talking financially necessarily, as sort of personality, personal development that we could never have found without having walked that road.
Some very true words there, and I'd say also a great film recommendation for anyone that hasn't seen it. I haven't seen it for a long, long time, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
So we always end on a quick fire round. So this is short questions and short answers. So question one,
Yeah.
failure is?
A learning experience.
What's your life's mission?
To bring my gift to others so they can bring their gift to theirs.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to people on the when you're on your deathbed?
Do what you love, but be strategic.
What's one habit that keeps you resilient?
Fitness. Keeping fit.
Any in particular?
High intensity training for me is great because quick, very effective for my type.
Absolutely. If you could be immortal and live forever, would you take it and why?
No, I think death brings sweetness to life. Immortality would be extremely boring.
If you could swap places with one other business person in the world, who would it be?
I guess I have a lot of time for Elon Musk, despite all the things I don't have time for, just in terms of his visionary capacity.
And is there anyone you could recommend that you should think I should have on as a guest?
I've got a wonderful client by the name of Margot, who I will introduce you to,
Please.
who I think just has a really great gift. Now, I'm not sure of her personal life in terms of failure and struggle, but yes, Margot Mansfield, she's the managing partner of a wonderful company. And I just think she manifests resilience in her life, her work, her training.
Great. Yeah, no, let's get connected. So where can people find you and connect with you?
So howardwhiteson.com. My email's at the bottom, howard@howardwhiteson.com. And obviously Howard's free gift if they want that book. Right now I'm making it available for free because I just don't believe our gifts should always be charged for.
Amazing. I'll put all that in the show notes. So Howard, thanks so much for being here and it's been an incredibly enjoyable conversation. You've got so much sort of wisdom and gifts as there's the word of the day potentially to share. So thank you so much for sharing all of that today.
My pleasure, Jez.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jeswood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.